Hello, YouTube. Wow, that's loud. Ronan Kazi, Legendary Capital. Well, as you know, I like running Legendary content on the Division 2. I jumped into this group. That person was dead, the leader, and the next guy's dead. Just right when I go in there. Usually that's a sign to quit. But this isn't that kind of group, so I'm going to take my time. I was set up from previously playing up on the summit. And so I'm going to go in here and knock this out. I'm already set up with the healing. Of course, I'm doing Vial Jam because that's what I do. What are we going to talk about today? Well, what you're going to learn is that character, the group leader, don't die, Ronan, don't die. That character, the group leader, is maxed out. It's a very powerful build. It's the proverbial glass cannon. Now, I don't look at what his build is, but he puts out an enormous amount of DPS. And he or she pushes also. And so I've asked you several times to consider looking at life, not black and white, not all or nothing, not 100 or 0, but a bandwidth. So let's say whatever you want to use as the range. But let's say if you're talking about damage, could you be 100% damage? I'd say maybe you want to build that's between 60 and 80% of the maximum amount of damage you could do. And that goes into different things. Games are different than life. So this is what I want you to understand. When games first came out, they mimicked the real world. In that, there was some value being able to do a little bit of this, have a little bit of intellect, being able to have a little bit of this, have a little bit of that. But what we found is those games were horrible to play. It was just like real life. So you'd come home from working a hard day, and then you'd be in, let's say, Azuran's Call or EverQuest or one of those games, and you're fishing, and you got to spend hours fishing to get your fishing level up. It's too much like work. No thank you, people. So what began to develop is a thing called min-maxing. You minimize your lower stats, you maximize your positive stats. In a game like Destiny 2, you have some of these basic characteristics. You get them up to 100. You want to have 3 of them. You have 6 total. And you want 3 of them at 100, let's say. Really, you don't need them at 100 because this is what I'd ask anyone. Does anyone know the damage difference between 100 damage at 30% reduction or 27% reduction? Right, exactly. One you're getting done, 70%, 70 damage, other one 73. So you really don't need to do all that. That's the kind of sliding scale, but we're going to talk about that later. So we're talking about a range of things and what you need to do. And when you put this in your life, we're not in a discrete universe that we can feel and say, I'm going to be 40% love today, or I'm going to give, of my 100% scale on love, I'm going to give my wife 90% of it. Just think about the saying, I'm going to give 110%, how asinine that is, because if you understand percentages, you can't give more than what you can give your maximum. Then if you can give more than your maximum, then your maximum is the thing that you're giving, not what you thought it was before. Anyway. I want you to think about your life in these terms like a bandwidth, not necessarily hard stops, not all the way forward. Here, we're going to run them. This guy's up forward. I'm like, F it. I'm going to go with you, bro. If you want to wipe in a heroic, I'll be right there with you. So we go up there, and he smokes those people up there, and I'm going to Vial Jam up here, and I like this aggressive play style. And he's knocking those guys. And I think this is Golden Bullet, too, so he's taking advantage of that Golden Bullet. So I'm talking about that you have this bandwidth in everything. In your relationships, your attention, You're never going to run yourself completely out. You're never going to fill up too much. You're going to be right. I'm not saying stay in the middle because that's not where you need to be either, but maybe your bandwidth's between 90 and 80 when you're doing work. Like for you, a bad day is you're giving 80%, not all the way down to 20 or 30. But there's this concept of bandwidth, of not necessarily going all the way. It's easier, I understand to you, that it's easier if you just say, I'm going to eat no carbs at all. Sounds good. But in reality, moderation is the key to that. And there's so many things. I have people in my life that discovered reading and they think it's great, and then they're going to read. I'm going to read everything now, and then they burn out and they don't ever read again. Weight loss is the same thing. All these things, they're very minor things that you need to do. It's just consistency over time. Or maybe that's, doing the same thing over time. And it's not sexy. Please like, share, hit the notifications, comment. So this legendary is going good. This is I do down here. I sped it up to 1.25 so you don't have to watch all this. I've already done one legendary this week. I do these legendaries just because it's fun content. It's the only content I really have fun. Or if I'm doing legendary up there. Not a snob about it. It's just everything else is so easy. The build I have and what I set as success in that build, the framework, it's easy to play. So I have a red build that I love playing, and it's easy to play that build. I have some gameplay of that. Hopefully I'll show you. But when you have a glass cannon, in real life, when you have 100% of your stats in one thing, that's a very sad story for that person because they're not well-rounded. You're not a video game. So being able to discuss different books that are instrumental. And here's what I'm going to tell you. There's never been a better time. There may be in the future there'll be a better time. There's never been a better time for you to understand culture. And I flash forward right up to this part. There's never been a better time to be cultured because you can get pretty good synopsis of a lot of really good books through YouTube. This was a really fast run in this part. Again, that guy, the group leader, he just goes out there, I think. Me and the healer stay in here. He's out running around. I think he dies and he gets back up. So this bandwidth, this kind of trumpet chart of performance, it's harder to stay within that. That's part of the challenge of that. Part of the challenge is I maintain my performance with my spouse, with my children, with my coworkers. My worst day is 80 or 90%, whatever it is. And I've told you before, you're not supposed to. When I was in Coast Guard, they didn't want you to use 100% either. You've got to have something in reserve. So there's a lot of different things to consider. But I want you to think about how could you make that in your life? What would that look like for you? And why should you do this? Because I'm going to submit to you, it's going to accentuate your highs and even out your lows. Because you're going to be the person determining that. If you're playing video games, these type of video games are simulations of some types of scenarios. These are scenarios that you can map analogous to things in your life. And you can say this, staying in cover and making sure we win this battle is like when I do this at work or in my relationship, I clean the kitty litter box once a day. My wife did that every day when I went to work for years. And then she, during COVID, didn't feel so well, Mrs. Ronan Kazi. And then so now I just do it. I do it every day. Probably could go every other day or whatever, but it's just better for the cats, it's better for the house, better for everything, right? It's one of those things. So let's imagine a day if I fall off, the worst is going to happen. We went 2 days. These spoiled cats. These spoiled house cats. So I want you to consider that, because this is going to be the basis for a way you can relook at your life. Another way you can look at your life, shape your experience, and shape yourself moving forward is by defining this kind of bandwidth. You don't want it so wide that you can have these big swings. And we'll move forward from there. It's important though. Life isn't black and white. And if you make it all black or all white or all ones or all zeros, right? It's easy to do that, but that's not necessarily how you should do it. Doesn't mean it's the best because it's the easiest. That's a little bit like Occam's razor. And when I say easiest, that a system, the steps to take to do a system are the easiest. I don't want to argue with my friends about it, but I use language in sometimes a different way. And so that's another talk for another day. YouTube, I appreciate you. Like, share, subscribe. Ronan Kazi out.